Afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the little delay there. I am a bit behind as per usual, but that's what always goes on. It's been a while since I've actually live streamed, so hopefully I can get back into the groove of this pretty quickly. Today I am going to just be studying, going over stuff for my final exams, which my first one is on Tuesday and today is Friday. So I am way behind on studying for that, and yeah, I'm just going to be doing that, answering whatever questions you all have. It's Let me quickly check and make sure that everything is running smoothly. I've got my own stream open here on the side, so I'm just going to check in with this, make sure that chat's working. All right, looks like that is working just fine. Yeah. Okay, so first thing up on the agenda for today, I'm going to switch all of my calendars and everything over to today. I'm a bit behind this, like I said, so I haven't even switched my calendars over from yesterday. And I'll get settled in and we'll get to studying. Also, if there are any issues with the video or with the audio, just let me know. I don't have that great of a setup here with me right now, so I'm just going with kind of a bootleg setup, but hopefully I'll be able to set up something nicer for future streams. I just have my mic here off to the side, so all right. My first exam on Tuesday is going to be criminal law, and I'm actually not going to be studying for that very much today because I don't want to get bogged down in that too early. I want to just focus on my other stuff before I zone in on that, because that's a closed book exam, and I'm not going to bring anything into that exam, so I want to make the last few days before that actually just solely focused on studying for that, and for right now I'm going to study and start preparing outlines for my other classes. To give you an idea of how far behind I am, most people start preparing their outlines during the course of the semester, and I don't have anything. And my first exam is in 3 days? So yeah, that's how I'm doing, but that's what today's for, to just study, catch up, and get ready. The final that I think I'm going to spend the most time preparing for today is probably going to be property, because it's our most dense class. It's our only 4-hour class or 4 credit hour course, so we have it twice a week for 2 hours. There's a lot of material that goes into it. Everything else is 3 hours, or my legal writing class was only 2 hours. So yeah. But now that all this is taken care of, we can get into the actual studying. And for that, I'm going to set aside my notes. I've got my casebook here, which I'm probably not even going to use for this, and I should probably give myself a little bit more room, push y'all back a little bit. Let me know if there's any issues with sound quality or anything throughout the course of this, and alright, let's switch over to this and go right here. Okay. Now, this is a property law outline. Law school outlines are basically just a combination of all the material that you've learned throughout the course of the semester put into a single place, and this is the one that I have for property law. This isn't even my own. This is one from a organization that I'm in, and it's not even for my professor. My professor doesn't have any outlines online that I can find, so I'm going with one for a different professor and hoping that this works and that I'm able to be successful. I skimmed through this a little bit beforehand, and I'm fairly confident that it'll cover everything that I need it to. So that is the plan for now. I'm just going to start working through this, and I'll also work through some of my own notes here, see if I want to make an actual outline. I'm not entirely convinced that I want to, but we'll see. Okay, so here I'm actually going to switch something over on my phone first. Feel free to take a look at what's on here so you have a general idea of the way that we approach law school and law school studying. Okay. So, this is how we started our property class. We started by talking about the theoretical and philosophical underpinnings of what property is, why we want to study it, and why it's important before we started getting into the actual legal rules of it. And that took a while. As you guys can see, I'm not sure if my camera's in the way, but this is a very large document. It's 32 pages. There's a lot that you cover in a semester of law school. We started our classes late January, and our last day of class was actually this past Monday, and we went through enough material that somebody typing up their notes and stuff like this covered 32 pages, which is a lot. But it's kind of necessary because you learn almost everything that you need to be a lawyer in your first year of law school. I guess I should cover why I'm starting with property law as opposed to any of the other types of law, and that's just because of how dense this is, how much material is in there, and how little prep I did for it during the actual semester. So I wanted to make sure that I got a good jump on this, and then as you can see up at the top here, I also want to do a bunch of my con law stuff or constitutional law stuff. There are actual outlines from people that have taken my professor's class. Actually, someone took it this time last year, which is the last time he taught it. So this is very up to date, save for a couple of the current Supreme Court cases that we're reading. So this is going to be extremely helpful to me because I'm going to be honest, for constitutional law, I did not study, I did not read. So yeah, there's a lot of work to do for that class, but for property law, I'm fairly confident. So I'm going to get started reading through this. I'm probably just going to talk to myself and talk to you guys as I go through it. That's the way that I tend to study. I learn best by teaching other people, and I've worked as a tutor before, I've been a TA before, and last semester I studied by talking through all of the material with some of my friends and explaining everything on one of these outlines to them, and I felt like that really helped me. But this semester, my friends in my section prefer studying alone, and I'm not assigned to TA or lead review sessions for this class, so that's why I'm doing it for you guys. If you have any questions at all, please just pop them in the chat. If there are any issues with the audio or anything, please let me know. I just have the one mic over here off to the side. I hope it's not picking up too much of the fan noise, but Yeah, that's enough stalling. I've been stalling for like 15 minutes before I even started studying, but then again, I've been putting off studying for a few months. So let's get into this. First are the theoretical underpinnings and the philosophy stuff for why we want to study property. My section also started the same way that this section did, where we started with the theories for why we want to protect property. And these are all kind of philosophical ideas. The first one is that we want to promote the development of land and property, and by giving everybody an interest in their own private property, it's going to end up falling into the hands of whoever can make the most economically beneficial use out of it. That also falls into right here, promote utilitarian social policy. For those of you who don't know what utilitarianism is, it's basically it's a combination of a theory of what's right and a theory of what's good. Okay, so I don't know why I'm struggling to explain it right now. I've studied this in undergrad. I've written papers on this before, but utilitarianism, you want to maximize the good, and what's right is maximizing the good, and the good is anything that promotes happiness. So basically, you're trying to promote as much happiness as possible. It's a combination of hedonism and something else, but hedonism is just the theory that good is pleasure, and you want to try and maximize that any way that you can. You can do that through just economic development, making sure that people have as much money as possible, people can buy anything that they want to, and that's what utilitarianism boils down to. Part of the reason I'm struggling is I woke up late this morning, as evidenced by my wet hair and the fact that I haven't finished my coffee, but also I am still nervous jumping back into a live stream like this, but hopefully I'll calm down over the next couple hours, because that's how long I plan on being here. I have hours worth of studying to do, and yeah. Okay, so let's actually just break this down point by point. The theory is why we want to protect private property. 1, promote development, incentivizes people to work land and get more stuff. You have to balance it with the public good. This relates down to the tragedy of the commons. If you leave stuff out for the public use exclusively, everybody will tear through it. But if you leave nothing to the public use, then people are not going to be able to enjoy things, and everything will fall into the hands of a select few. Promoting labor and specialization. If you work hard for something, you want to enjoy the fruits of your labor, basically, and promoting private property allows us to let people enjoy the fruits of their labor. Utilitarian social policy. I was explaining this poorly just a minute ago because I haven't studied my utilitarianism or philosophy in a while, so I forget the exact terminology. It used to roll off the tongue, but moving on from that, to promote democracy. If you have a stake in land or in private property, then you're interested in protecting that by going out and voting for what's in your best interest. So this is just a theory that if we let people have land and private property, then they're going to want to protect it and vote and become integral members of society. Moving on from that, to promote individual liberties. This kind of relates to again, this class isn't the class that I took, but this relates very similarly to the theory of promoting one's own development. We form emotional connections to the property that we have, whether it be your house, even personal property like rings and stuff. We form emotional connections to it, and there's theories supporting the idea that allowing us to have stuff like that really improves our life. We feel more fulfilled having stuff like this. We have an interest in protecting it, therefore we should have private property and rights to protect them. Okay. Now that that's out of the way, let's move on to, this is the bulk of what property is based around. The theory as to what property actually is. Most people assume that property is a thing, something that you have, you possess, and that's it. In law school and in the legal field in general, we view property as a bundle of rights. So property is a thing, but we view it as what are your rights to that thing. Some of these are the right to transfer. Say you own something, you have the right to give it to somebody else. The right to exclude. You own land, you have the right to prevent others from coming onto it. The right to use. If you own something, you have the right to use it however you see fit. And the right to destroy. If you want to burn up an old house or something on your property, you have the right to destroy it. You have the right to tear apart a paper that you wrote that you don't like. These all relate to maximizing everybody's use and enjoyment of their land, of their own private property. So these are the rights that we see in law school and in the legal field of property, and all of our laws and theories about property law are about protecting these rights and maximizing the usefulness of them. I mentioned the tragedy in the commons a little bit before, the theory that a person will always take over more and destroy more of whatever is held in common out of self-interest. This is a very interesting theory that has been written about a bunch. Hardin was one of the main writers about it. Imagine that there's a massive grass field in the center of a small town. If it's open to everybody and people can bring their cows there and graze there, then people are going to constantly bring their cows and graze them there and not worry about replacing what they take because they feel it's not their job. They don't own it. They're just making use out of it. And what is bringing one more cow going to do? Well, it's going to eventually deteriorate that land, that property, until nobody can use it. So we have an interest in keeping some property private so that way individuals have some stake in protecting it. If we didn't have any private property and everything was just public land, people will be going around taking as many resources as possible as quickly as possible. So, yeah. Okay, that relates to externalities. Anybody who studied economics will already have an idea of what externalities are, but externalities are just any consequence of a transaction that doesn't fall on a party that's in the transaction. That can be a bit confusing at first, but this boils down to say a company and another company are making a transaction, and as part of that transaction, company A is going to need to produce a ton of smog and chemicals. Neither of them have to deal with that smog, but the people that live around the plant of company A do have to deal with it. And they didn't agree to whatever contract companies A and B agreed to, but they have to deal with the negative consequences of it. And that's basically what externalities boil down to. There are negative externalities and positive externalities. So a positive externality is your government wants to create a new park in the area. They agree with the contractors to build a park. You aren't a party of that transaction. You aren't the government, you aren't the contractors, but you get to enjoy the benefit of the park being built. And that's a positive externality. And the co-waste theory is an economic theory about how we will eventually internalize all of these externalities so long as we're in a free market. It can get pretty confusing. We didn't cover it very much in my property law section, so I'm not going to touch on it too much here. This, like I said, this outline is for a completely different class, but my professor didn't have an outline available online that I could see, and I didn't make one during the semester, so this is what I'm stuck with. Okay, this is when we start to get into the actual laws of property law. Everything up till now has been the philosophical underpinnings, which is interesting, and it gives you a good foundation for why we study this, but it's not entirely necessary. So, the law of capture is talking about who has a right to something. Okay, so it's who has a right to a natural resource, basically. Oftentimes it comes down to who captured the thing in question, whether it be a animal. Typically we see this come in with wild animals and whether or not they're actually wild, who owns them, who has the hunting rights to them. I feel like I'm talking too much and there's nobody chatting, so it's weird feeling like I'm explaining this to myself but to everybody all at once. I need to settle myself down. Okay. The typical case that you see with the rule of capture is Pearson v. Post. This is a very old case about someone hunting foxes. And here, I'll actually pull it up in my book. And it talks about who owns a fox that they go and hunt. There's one guy who is chasing a fox, hunting him all across a ton of land, and he's on the verge of capturing him. And then his neighbor, who doesn't like him very much, swoops in, kills the fox, and takes him. And this case is deciding who owns the fox. The rule that we get out of this is that capture requires possession, and this basically gives us the winner of the case happens to be the guy who swept in out of nowhere and killed the fox, which might seem a little confusing to some of you because the other guy was hunting the fox, chasing him all over the place, but he didn't actually possess the fox. He only pursued it. So here, pure pursuit is not by itself possession, and therefore not capture. The first person to deprive the animal of its natural liberty has obtained possession of it. So, that's a pretty broad rule. How do you deprive an animal of its natural liberty? It could be that you kill it, like in the Pearson v. Post example, or it could be that you put a net around it, like we see in the next case, State v. Shaw. This is actually a criminal case. You can tell because it's state as opposed to another party name. But this relates to the property law issue of the rule of capture. So, in this case, a company had already caught a ton of fish, had them in their fishing nets, but there was a way for the fish to escape if they swam a certain way and jumped out. And because there was that way to escape, some criminals came in and they sliced part of the net and took a bunch of the fish. The question came down to, did the fishing company deprive the animals of their natural liberty? And the fact that they were confined in a net, even though there was the possibility of escape, this meant that they had deprived them of their natural liberties. And so the rightful owners of the fish were the fishing company, not the criminals who came and tried to take them away. So, combining these two cases, we can see kind of where the line happens to be for depriving an animal of its natural liberties. If you if you restrict its movements, albeit not completely, you can still say that you deprived it of its natural liberties. If you kill the animal, you very obviously deprived it of its natural liberties. And that is the basics behind the rule of capture. Here, we can go over what this person used for the rationale behind why we have this rule in property law. They discuss externalities and the tragedy of the commons. To avoid this, allow you to catch some, but the amount is limited on how much you can catch. All the animals may be depleted if we follow a strict rule of capture. Okay. Promoting development encourages people to invest in technology to make capture easier and help balance the playing field for all. Equity and poverty allows everyone an opportunity to capture something at a point in time. Okay, this is another case that we talk about with the rule of capture. It's about someone catching a baseball at a baseball game, and they kind of struggle over it, and they're trying to decide who actually owns the baseball. I think it was a home run ball that was pretty big and important. We actually weren't required to read this for my section, but we did skim over some of the rules with it. Basically, fairly similar to the other rule of capture cases, where it's whoever can deprive it of its natural liberties, which is weird when you apply it to a chattel, which is just a piece of property, like a piece of personal property. Like, my ring would be considered chattel. My apartment, though, would be considered property. They're different, but a lot of the same rules apply. So they applied that rule to a baseball. Whoever actually captured it and held on to it got to keep it. Okay. I'm a little bit off because some of these we studied a bit later in the semester, so this layout of this class is a bit different than what I'm used to, but it's the best option that I have since I didn't make my own outline. So yeah, I'm going to try and do my best with this and just keep going. I remember reading the Johnson v. McIntosh case. I do not remember exactly what it's about, so I'm going to read through these notes and try and figure it out. Again, if any of you have any questions, comments, if there are any issues with the stream, just drop it in chat and let me know. I don't want to be forced to sit here and full-on study this entire time, even though that's what I probably should be doing. Part of the reason I'm doing it this way is so I have an excuse to keep distracting myself whenever somebody wants to chat and ask a question or something. Okay, now I remember this case. It was about whether or not a transfer of property was actually legal because there were questions of who actually owned the land, the Native Americans who inhabited it, or the government. And this is a case that showed us that the U.S. government owned the property, even even though they still gave all of the rights of the property to the Native Americans, they themselves didn't own it. So it was a really weird case, kind of trying to justify why the U.S. owned the property and why the Native Americans couldn't transfer it to a third party. And yeah, this case is fairly contested as to whether or not it was right, and the rationale behind it isn't very clear or very convincing. This is one of the cases that leads into a lot of other legal fields nowadays with water law and tribal land, particularly here in Arizona. There are a ton of legal issues and a ton of legal questions relating to that, and it's one of the big things that we study here at ASU. So if any of you are interested in that, I'd recommend checking out this case because it is the foundation for a lot of modern day tribal law. Okay. Now we're going to get into stuff that I'm a bit more familiar with. If anything, this study session is just going to show me how much work I have to do to prepare and how far behind I actually am. The last day of class, we did some multiple choice questions in class, and I did all right, but I didn't do great. For having done zero studying to that point, I did fairly well, but there are definitely some areas where I need to buckle down, and this is going to just show me what those areas are for property law in particular. Sorry, I'm just checking something out real quick. Okay, we are going to be getting into nuisance here in just a sec. Okay. Nuisance has a couple of ways that it can be viewed, but basically, I'm looking for my exact definition that I have in here. Okay, I'm not sure where my nuisance definition is, but okay. Oh, actually, first let's start with trespass. Everybody's heard of trespassing. Everybody kind of knows what trespassing is, but the way that's implemented is not necessarily as straightforward as everybody thinks. Trespassing is strict liability, so you're responsible for it anytime that you do it or anytime that happens. So, anytime that you intentionally enter someone else's land, it's trespassing. You The only exceptions of that are if you accidentally end up in someone's land because of some sort of accident, like say a car crash, where it's your only choice is to swerve onto someone's lawn. That's not trespassing. But say you're walking through the woods and you accidentally cross a boundary line onto someone's property, that is trespassing. So long as you have the intent to enter the land, you are trespassing. You don't need to have the intent to trespass. Also, in the example that I used where you swerve onto someone's lawn, if you refuse to leave after being asked to, that is also trespassing. And any, it's not just entering land physically. If you throw anything onto someone's lawn or anything like that, that also counts as trespassing. Anytime that you physically enter or you cause some other object to physically enter, that counts as trespassing. And like I said, it's strict liability. Okay. Nuisance. Okay. So a nuisance is an intentional interference with someone's private use and enjoyment of their land. So right here, this is the big one, the private nuisance, a non-trespassory invasion of another's interest in private use and enjoyment of their land. So anytime that you enter someone else's land or you do something intentionally, not entering their land, see non-trespassory, anytime that you intentionally do something that harms someone else's interest in the use and enjoyment of their land, that counts as nuisance. The big one that we see is spite fences and like creating buildings that are massive. These are all nuisances that just are done for the express purpose of preventing someone else from fully using and enjoying their land or their private property. We also have public nuisances, which are unreasonable interferences with a right common to the general public. So some of these are like making loud noise and stuff. Basically anything that's unreasonable and interferes with people's use of public land or some public rights. So that's the basics behind nuisance. Oftentimes we apply a balancing test to this. The invasion has to be intentional and unreasonable, or unintentional and otherwise actionable. Okay, it has to be intentional and unreasonable, or it basically has to violate some other type of law, like negligence law or tort law, to constitute a nuisance. It's intentional if it's done for the purpose of causing the harm, or if you know that the harm is substantially likely to occur. It's unreasonable if the harm outweighs the benefit or the utility of the actor's conduct. So this is the balancing test right here. So if you harm another individual more than you benefit by doing something, then it's a nuisance. So if you say you want to put up a fence just to piss off your neighbor, what's the benefit that you get out of that? You get a little bit of enjoyment out of pissing off your neighbor, but you are substantially interfering with their enjoyment of their land, which is something that we seek to protect. So the benefit of your conduct of erecting a fence is outweighed by the harm that your neighbor suffers. We look at a couple of factors when determining whether the gravity of the harm or the utility of the conduct is greater, such as the extent of the harm involved, what type of harm it is, the social value attached to the property interest that you're invading, or to the use and enjoyment invaded. So oftentimes we place a high value on people being able to use their home and as a place of rest and to not be disturbed in their own home. We place a lower value on other types of land use, but we will always look at the social value of whatever that land is being used for. If it's being used as a garbage dump, there's not a massive social value attached with that. So you might get away with more nuisance-like behavior in that case. Okay, then we also look at the burden on the person harmed of avoiding the harm. So if you're in your car and someone's honking at you, you have the burden's on you to drive away in most cases. But if you're sitting in your apartment and somebody's blasting music right next door, you aren't expected to leave and avoid the harm. Like, you are expected to be able to enjoy your land privately and get the full use and enjoyment out of it. It still feels so weird just straight up talking to myself like this. In the past, when I've streamed, there's always been like something that I was doing where I could get distracted, and not have to worry about constantly making noise and keeping the entertainment going. In this case, I guess it's not really entertainment, but education going. Like the last time that I streamed, I taught myself piano, so I barely talked. I was just playing piano and getting pissed off at myself during it. But now I feel like I'm obligated to try and explain everything that I'm doing and teach this to all of you, even though I should just be studying for myself. But oh well. Let's move on. That's enough of me complaining about that. Courts also look at the utility of the conduct causing the invasion. So there are certain things that you're able to do. Like there's certain utility to you being able to play music in your own apartment. If you play it too loud, then that'll substantially interfere on someone else's use and enjoyment of their land. But if you aren't allowed to play music at all, then you're being unfairly restricted. So we look at a variety of factors to determine what the social value and the utility is of the conduct that you're performing that might be seen as a nuisance, the suitability of the conduct to the character of the locality. So this is something that we look at, like if we place a high social value on having a car that works, and therefore we're allowed to repair our vehicles. But there's a difference in repairing a vehicle on the side of a road, like you're just pulled over in some residential neighborhood, changing your oil in the street, versus changing it in an auto garage. In one situation, the locality is more geared towards what you're trying to do, towards the conduct that you're doing, whereas in the other, you're more likely to cause a nuisance and piss people off because you're obstructing a residential road. You're getting oil everywhere if you're not good at an oil change. But yeah, and then this relates back to the impracticability of preventing / avoiding the invasion. So it's fairly easy for you to move your car to a different, more private location to change the oil. It's fairly easy for you to put on headphones to listen to your music as opposed to blasting it on speakers. And those all weigh in favor of your conduct being deemed a nuisance if it's easy for you to avoid doing it. If it's difficult for you to avoid doing it, then oftentimes it won't be deemed a nuisance. Like, say somebody's going through labor in the middle of a Walmart. Sometimes you just need to do what's going on, but if you're performing a scheduled surgery in the middle of Walmart, that is completely different. One, you could have scheduled to do at a hospital, which is preferable. The other, it just happened, and you can't really prevent the invasion happening on Walmart's property. This all relates back to some economic theories of externalities, and we want to allocate the liability to the least cost avoider. So whoever has the easiest job of preventing the harm they're the ones that should be in charge of actually preventing that harm. So if it's easier for you to put on headphones to listen to music than it is for your neighbor uh, to move, then the burden should fall on you. We get a lot of cases trying to find the exact line of where a nuisance begins, or when it's just conduct for, or when it's acceptable conduct versus when it's a nuisance. Uh, oh, and here's a nice Latin phrase that translates to "do what you want with your stuff, just don't be a jerk." And that's basically what nuisance law kind of boils down to. You're allowed to do whatever you want with your stuff, just don't be a jerk and don't piss off your neighbors. So, in one of the big cases that we saw for this is Sundowner versus King, and one neighbor erected a spite fence. And for those of you who don't know what a spite fence is, it's just a fence that you build to piss off your neighbor and to prevent them from getting light. And if you do that, it constitutes a nuisance. You can't do something for the express purpose of pissing off your neighbor or causing a nuisance to them. That relates to what rights you have to air and sunlight, and we see in Pra v. Moretti another nuisance case. I'm trying to remember what the holding is for this case. Let me try and find this. There were so many cases that we went through in property law that I forget most of them most of the time. But this one came down to somebody was building a new home that would have blocked the sunlight of their neighbor. And here, you know what? Let me pull up the PowerPoint for this. If you see anything that you shouldn't see, you didn't see it. This is access to just all of my law school stuff here. I'm hoping that... Okay, yeah, we have all the PowerPoints. I'm not sure if it'll be this one or a different one. No, my computer does not like this. Okay, you know what? Okay, these are a lot of the trespass cases. So you know what? I will skip down to the nuisance cases and the right to use cases here, and then we'll jump back up to the trespass cases. It's probably beneficial to actually look at the cases that we specifically did to show, like, so that way we understand what's going on, and then we can jump back to the other outline and study stuff from there. So, okay. Like I just mentioned, Sundowner versus King gives us a lot of these spite fence doctrines, spite fence cases, and the rule that we get out of this is that you cannot create a spite fence. You can't do anything for the express purpose of annoying a neighbor, but that leaves some stuff up in the air, like what counts as a spite fence? Does this that I'm showing you count as a spite fence? Personally, I don't think it does. I think that this does something besides just piss off the neighbor. This provides aesthetic value. This is art. This is the pinnacle of artistic representation. So this clearly is not a spite fence, and therefore it's not a nuisance. My professor disagreed with that point in class, though, and said that this was a spite fence. So the law on this is still a little fuzzy. So long as you can justify what you're doing as not being for the sole purpose of pissing off a neighbor, you can argue that it's not a spite fence and that you shouldn't be liable for nuisance. Okay, Prav v. Moretti. This is the one that I was talking about, and this is a depiction of what the situation was. So Prav's house was already built, and it was sitting there with solar panels on top. Moretti's house was being built on the adjacent lot, and the way that it was proposed to be built would block a decent amount of the solar collectors and the solar panels on Prav's house. It was contested in court as to how much of the solar panels would be covered. One estimate was as low as like 10%, and one estimate was about 80%, and that's a big difference. Never mind. Here are the actual numbers. Pra said that 8% of his collector would be covered, and Moretti said only 3% would be covered. So both of those are really low. And here's the definition of nuisance that we got. Private nuisance exists when the defendant's conduct results in an intentional, non-trespassatory, unreasonable, and substantial interference with the plaintiff's use and enjoyment of her land. So, to apply nuisance law, you take a look at the facts of the case. Okay, so in Prav v. Moretti, is Moretti's building of his house intentional? Yeah. Is it non-trespassatory? To look at that, you see if there's an actual physical invasion of the land. And there's no actual physical invasion of the land or of the rights. So this would be a non-trespassatory interference. Is it unreasonable for Moretti to build his house in such a way that it would block part of the light on Prav's solar panels? That one's kind of questionable. Moretti could build on the other side of his lot, but it's kind of up in the air. This is when we get into the balancing test factors that we talked about before as to whether or not it is reasonable. This one's pretty up in the air. The next one's not so much. A substantial interference. 3% to 8% of a solar panel being covered is not very substantial. In fact, that's nowhere near substantial as far as I can see. So that would immediately disqualify this as not being a nuisance. And the last factor is use and enjoyment of their land. Pretty much any time that a nuisance claim is made, it will satisfy that factor, because otherwise it wouldn't get very far. That's just part of the prima facie case. But okay, so this is the basics of nuisance law. Let's jump back to trespass, because we didn't go over any of the cases really with that. I just explained to you all what the rule is. So, okay. And all of this that we're doing is relating to the right to exclude. If you remember earlier in the live stream, I mentioned that there are a couple of rights that are associated with property. property is basically just a bundle of rights, a bundle of stuff that you're allowed to do and with your own property. And one of the most important is the right to exclude. You can determine who uses your property, who enters it, blah, blah, blah. So that is the big factor that we are looking at right now, and relating to that are, of course, trespass and nuisance. So, Jock versus Steenberg Homes. This is a pretty fun case where the owners of a piece of land stated that they didn't want a company dragging a mobile home across their land to get to their new neighbor's property, and this ultimately ended with the manager of Steenberg Homes basically saying fuck them and just dragging the mobile home across anyways. So even though they were already gone by the time that this case was brought, they... Oh, hey Michaela. Finals start on Tuesday. My first final is going to be criminal law. I'm going to start studying for that in the next couple of days. I want to get a baseline for all my other stuff before I start buckling down for that, but that is my first final, and they go all the way through the Friday after that, so I have 2 weeks of finals after this, and after that I'm not entirely sure what I'm going to be doing for the summer. I have a part-time job working as an online TA for ASU, but other than that, I don't have a ton. I'm sure you love crim law because you've got to sit in on the class. How does the audio sound? I haven't checked the audio. I just know that the video is doing all right. And thank you for stopping in, because this is my first break from just talking to myself nonstop. Okay, that's good to hear. Up till this point, I've been talking to myself nonstop, trying to basically explain all this stuff, and it's more difficult to explain something with nobody listening than it is to do like a Zoom review session and stuff where people will actually respond. When nobody's responding, it's weird because there's dead air a lot of the time that I feel like I should be filling, so I'm constantly saying random bullshit. But yeah, thank you for stopping in. I'm glad that the audio is good. But on that note, let's get back to this case. So Steenberg Homes, their manager basically said fuck you, and they drug a mobile home across the Jock's land, and this was against the Jock's will. I let some of my friends know that they could stop in if they want to, but I'm probably not going to make it a full-on study session. Maybe next time, but for now I'm just keeping this chill, and this is my way of forcing myself to actually study. But the Jocks said that they did not want the mobile home going across their lawn, that they didn't want it on their land at all, and Steenberg said fuck you, did it anyways. And even though the mobile home had already crossed the entirety of the lawn, the Jocks still brought this trespass suit because Steenberg and their workers had intentionally violated that and crossed their property. And the question was mainly about, is this trespass because the only other way to get the mobile home where it needed to be was across a dangerous and snowed-in mountain pass. Oh, hey Joseph, how's it going? And that was what this question basically, that's what this case came down to, is was Steenberg Homes required to take that dangerous mountain pass. And the court said yes, if there's an other option to get to where you need to go, then you're obligated to take that instead of crossing the land and just trespassing. So that's what this boiled down to. It's trespass to cross land, even if the only other option is dangerous. And it's even more egregious trespassing if the landowner stated that they don't want you crossing their land. All right. This is what I was talking about earlier. One is subject to liability to another for trespass, irrespective of whether he causes harm, if they intentionally enter land, and this is strict liability. If you enter someone else's land with the intention of entering the land, it's trespass, even if you don't cause any harm, and even if you don't intend to trespass, you just need to intend to enter the land. This is, as you can see here, this is a big part of tort law. Right now I'm studying for property because I don't want to focus too heavy on crim law right now. I think that doing property is best and getting a good foundation of property law before I buckle down and do crim law. This semester I have closed book final, so I want to, when I'm studying for that, I want to just only do that and not really have to think about anything else. If I started studying for it right now, then the next couple of days I'd have to spend on property and common law, and I'd be distracted from memorizing MPC versus common law. So that's my rationale behind doing property. And also there's a shit ton of stuff in property. It's our only 4 credit course, or only 4 credit hour course this semester. So far I've done just the philosophical underpinnings, and now we're getting into the actual land use. State versus Shack. This is another criminal case that came based on human rights. A company was, actually it was healthcare providers, like a doctor, were this doesn't have many of the facts there, so I'll just keep us on the picture and explain this from memory. So a doctor and some lawyers were coming onto this company's land to talk to their employees. The Tedesco family owned a bunch of land, and they were keeping a ton of people on it to work the land. All their employees lived on the land, and oh, thanks for the tip, Michaela. I'll keep that in mind. I'll probably switch over to common law here in a little bit, not do crim yet, but I'll finish up like another PowerPoint of property before I jump back over to common law and starting that. But back to this case. The Tedesco family owned a farm. They kept a ton of the workers on it, and they told a doctor and lawyers for the farm workers that they couldn't come onto the land, and they stated that it was trespassing, and they tried to prosecute the doctor and lawyers for trespassing onto their land to go and visit their employees. But typically this would be trespassing. If you tell somebody not to come onto your land and they do anyways, that is the definition of trespassing. But in this case, the court actually stated that it's not trespassing because the employees live on the land and they have a right to accept visitors, even if those visitors are not approved of by the actual landowners or by the Tedesco family. So even though the Tedesco family said that they don't want the doctor and lawyers to come and talk to their employees on the land, because the employees lived there, they're the ones whose rights mattered in this case. So it's not trespassing for people to come and visit them. There's actually a currently decided Supreme Court case that's somewhat similar to this that I'll get to in the next few days relating to invasions of land like this. It's more so what constitutes a regulatory taking, which is at the end of this semester. So, yeah. But that is what we have on Trespass. It's fairly straightforward. If you live on the land and you work there, you're allowed to receive visitors even if the actual landowner says otherwise or refuses to allow that specific group of people there. So say a real world application of this is, say you live in an apartment complex and your landlord says no visitors, that they can't prosecute any visitors for trespassing. You're allowed to have people come and visit you at your apartment. The land rights are the ones, they relate to the tenant, the person in possession and that's using the land. If somebody steps into your private apartment, you're the one that can prosecute for trespassing, not your landlord. And yeah, that's just an interesting little tidbit about property law, is that the property rights are in the hands of the individual who currently possesses the property. That is everything that we have for trespassing, and then relating to the beginnings of nuisance law. So let's move on from here. Like Michaela mentioned, it's beneficial to swap back and forth between different classes, so that way you can kind of keep your brain refreshed. So I'll do one more PowerPoint for property, and we'll also quickly look at this outline that's here. Then we will switch over and do a little bit of common law, then switch back and just do that. Okay. This is right to destroy. Let me see what the outline that I have here looks like. Okay, this immediately gets into subsurface rights. We did that a little bit later in my section. So, oh, and they go straight into rights of finders. Okay, I don't think that this section covered the right to destroy, so I will just go over that now from the PowerPoints. Okay, so Ironman versus Mercantile Trust Company. This is about a family. Someone passed away. They owned a house and they wanted it to be destroyed after their death, basically. But it was registered like as a it was part of a historic neighborhood, so a bunch of the neighbors didn't want it to be destroyed, even though it was the wish of the person who passed away that it would be. So, as you can see, this is what the neighborhood looks like, and this is in St. Louis. So this is shockingly nice for St. Louis. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the city of St. Louis, but it does not look like this. So I can understand why the neighbors wouldn't want land to be destroyed. Okay, so Johnston was the owner of the property, and her will told the Mercantile Trust Company to destroy her house, to raze it to the ground, and to sell the land on which it's located, and then give the proceeds to her estate. So all of her living family members. And her neighbors were not very happy about this. They said that the neighbors stated that destroying the land and then destroying the property and then selling the land would massively reduce the value of it. It would also lower their own property values, and it would harm the aesthetics of the neighborhood. The majority in this case stated that the house couldn't be destroyed because it would be a waste and destruction of resources. It would negatively impact society to destroy this house, and they wanted to maximize whatever use there could be. They wanted to maximize the beauty of it, and this meshes well with our theory of why we want to protect private property in utilitarianism and economic efficiency. We want to make the best use of land possible, and destroying the land would limit that use and actually lower it. But it also goes against one of our fundamental rights in property. Everything that we possess, we have the right to destroy. If you own a textbook, you're allowed to tear it up if you want to. I actually don't own this textbook. It's a rental, so I'm not going to destroy it. But for example, like if you own paper, you're allowed to tear it up if you want to. And that is the fundamental right of destruction. It's one of the sticks in the bundle of rights that is property. And this decision said that you can't destroy your property if it would be a waste and destroy resources. Those two don't really mesh well together. But the reason that this was able to get through is that the landowner was dead. They weren't exercising their right to destroy. It would be another party exercising a different right to destroy, which was intolerable to them. The majority decided that if the landowner had been alive, so if Johnston had been alive, then she could have destroyed the place herself. She could have razed it to the ground and then sold the land. That was well within her rights. But the fact that she was dead, she was no longer the one exercising her rights. So it was impermissible for the land to be destroyed. Any questions so far about what the right of destruction entails and why this case came out the way that it did? Alright, I'm not seeing anything, so we'll move on. Really quick though, the dissent did argue that the owner has exclusive control of their private property and they should be allowed to destroy it so long as it doesn't impair someone else's enjoyment of their property. Like what we talked about with the last couple of cases relating to nuisance law, so long as you aren't interfering with someone's right to enjoy their property, you can do basically whatever you want with your own. And in this case, the landowner wasn't interfering with anybody else's right to enjoy their property. They were just deciding to destroy their own property. But the landowner was dead, so that's why the majority decided otherwise. And they basically said that the opinions and values of the living neighbors would be substantially impaired if the land was destroyed, and that's not outweighed by the owner's interest in destroying it because the owner's dead. There are a couple of questions and examples about like how this could have gone differently or like how this can be applied elsewhere, but we aren't really going to go we aren't going to go over those. Those are just stuff from class that we talked about. Okay, this jumps to a case that I actually talked about earlier because it was at the beginning of that outline, and that is Johnson v. McIntosh. And this one was the one about who actually owns the land that these Native American tribes were trying to sell. So you look at the timeline, the Native American tribes in 1773 and 1775 were trying to sell their land to the Johnson Group, but that sale was overturned because of a proclamation by England in 1763 that all of the land was theirs. Because they discovered the land, they said that they owned it, and once the United States gained independence, they became the owners of that land, even though they gave the right to inhabit the land to the Native Americans and let them still stay there. The United States was the actual owners of the land due to this proclamation. Therefore, the sale of the land from the Native American tribes to the Johnson Group was invalid, as the Native Americans didn't have the right to transfer the land. That relates back to the bundle of rights theory. You have the right to transfer the land or the property so long as you own it. But in this case, they said that even though the Native Americans were the initial people that discovered it, they maintained the land, they lived on it, they were not the owners and could not transfer it. They had all of the other rights, but they couldn't transfer it because they did not own it. And again, this is highly contested, like in modern tribal law and modern water law. There are a lot of people who have issues with the way that this case was decided. It basically says that because England came over and conquered the land, that it immediately became theirs, and it then became the United States. And they're claiming it under discovery, even though we all know that it wasn't actually discovered by the European countries. So this is fairly contested, but that's the rule that we currently have. Okay. This just gives us a weird rule that you don't really see in application a ton, but it's this rule that if you take over land or you invade, you gain title to the land even if you don't actually discover it. Some of the takeaways from this, the right to destroy is not absolute. Like if you substantially interfere with someone else's use and enjoyment of their land, then you destroying something would constitute a nuisance. The court looks at the intent and the reason behind the destruction. They use utilitarian theory in some circumstances, and the timing of the destruction may be relevant. This all relates back to that house destruction case. You can acquire property by discovery. Discovery is very malleable, for lack of a better word. The right of Native Americans or Native inhabitants to a land to sell or alienate it is restrained, and property ownership is prescribed by law. So if you enter a land and your law is based on discovery as opposed to current inhabitants, then it's whoever discovers it. And as we see, this is very malleable. I am going to leave this up for now, and I'm going to quickly run and get myself some iced coffee and use the bathroom, but I will be back in just a couple of minutes. If any of you have any questions, type them in. I'll answer them as soon as I get back, but I'll be back in a sec. sorry for the delay. Had to go set myself up with an iced coffee. So, yeah. I think that, like Michaela mentioned, it's beneficial to switch between classes, but I think that right now what I should actually be doing is taking a bunch of these takeaways and putting them into my own outline, because I don't have my own outline. The one that I keep using is from a different professor. So I think I'm actually going to make an outline for this class because I'm allowed to bring one with me. This isn't a closed book exam, so I'm going to go ahead and set myself up with one right now. Let me set my textbook off to the side. This is really showing me that I need to get an actual stream set up because I have just a mic laying here to the side. I'm going off my laptop. I don't have any actual camera set up. The last thing that I still have a lot that I need to get in order to stream more properly. But for now, I'm going to actually make this outline. Okay. I'll quickly fill things in that we've already covered, and then I'll hop over to common law for a little bit, and then we'll see how things are going. It's funny, the second that I got back from getting my iced coffee, the number of viewers actually decreased. Y'all prefer an empty chair to me. Makes me feel like a real streamer. But I do need a shit ton of stuff before I'm actually at that level. First, I should probably get an actual PC so that way you guys aren't listening to my camera or my fan just going crazy. Oh, this does not look good. I'll just go from here. Okay. This is probably... Hopefully y'all don't mind watching me make this outline quick. we'll fill it in as we go. Just the next one. I want to keep it in the same order as this. Okay. You know what? This is kind of what I was talking about earlier at the beginning. These are the theories of why we want to protect property rights and why we want to protect private property, and also what gives somebody the right to possess property or to possess this particular piece of land. I'll quickly re-explain these since I'm copying it down. First possession, just who had the land first, they own it. Labor theory, if you put labor into land or into property, you are entitled to anything that you produce. You're entitled to the fruits of your labor. Utilitarian theory, we want to maximize the overall happiness of society, and by allowing people to own private property, that allows property to go into the hands of who's going to be able to use it most beneficially. If land is much better suited for farming than it is for urban development, then the farmer is going to be able to pay more money because they'd be able to benefit the most, so they'll buy up the land. It'll fall into the hands of who is actually able to use it the best. Next is the civic republican theory. If I explained this earlier in the live stream, if you own property, then you have an interest in protecting it and you're going to go out and vote. And then personhood theory, also something I discussed a little bit earlier. Property allows us to develop personally. We all have an interest in the property that we own, whether it be private property and chattels like rings, necklaces, family pictures. We associate ourselves with the things that we own, and therefore we should be allowed to protect those things under property law because we want to protect what is ourselves. A big part of what makes us ourselves are the things that we own and associate with, and I know that sounds very consumerist, but it doesn't have to be. These can also just be, you have a strong spiritual connection to the family house that you grew up in, so we have an interest in wanting to protect that. And that's personhood theory. And those are our main theories of why we should have property rights and what to really do with and about them. This case isn't really that important, so I will move on to the next PowerPoint, get what I need to copy over, and yeah. Oh wow, I've already been going for a little under 2 hours. It feels like I just started. Okay. You know what? I'm going to maximize this and reread through this case and this info really quickly. Okay. And this just gives us a rule that you can't have unreasonable restraints on alienation. Alienation is just giving up your property, giving it to someone else, transferring it. You can't have unreasonable restraints on that, otherwise it voids whatever transaction. So, let me pop back over to the outline. I should be doing it like this. Oh, this one. Okay. This is an interesting case relating to like the patent rules of certain products and when they're kind of infringed on. The main issue was, can a person who owns a patent, a patentee who sells a patented product, bring an infringement claim to enforce a post-sale restriction? And the answer is no. When you sell one of your products, you can no longer control that item through the patent law. Its patent laws are exhausted. So once you sell a product as the patent holder, its patent laws, its patent is kind of exhausted. So once you sell a patented product, no longer control that product through the patent. Its patent rights are exhausted. This isn't to say that you can't enforce a patent once you sell it to like prevent other people from manufacturing and selling it. It just means that you can't force the product to like come back to you, and you can't stop other people from using the product in their own way. So with the refillable ink cartridges, you can't stop somebody from refilling them themselves if they figure out how to. You can stop them from making the product in general, though, but that's different. actually I should be marking where these cases come from. I know it's hard to believe, but this is actually the most work and studying that I've ever done for school, and I'm only 2 hours in. I typically don't prepare very much, but law school is different, so. We also went over property rights to the human body. I doubt that this is really going to be tested, but this was kind of a fun case. Any of you who are familiar with like cell lines, there's a very popular cell line that has had a lot of talk about it. The Gila cell line from Henrietta Lacks is one of the biggest parts of modern cancer research, and there are issues as to whether or not her family and her own the rights to that cell line, and a lot of the progeny that we have relates back to that case. But it's a fascinating story. I highly recommend that all of you read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks if you have the opportunity to, whether or not you're interested in it from a legal perspective or you're into biology or science. It's a fascinating story. A little bit of a longer read, but it's definitely worth the time. But the case that we read for this is actually different. It's Moore versus Regents of California. It came to the same conclusion as Henrietta Lacks in that it's no longer your property once the cells have been removed from you if you don't have like an expectation that you would maintain ownership of it. Okay. This relates to tort claim of conversion, but uh, the big thing in property is who owns it once it's been removed. So, here. All right. I don't think we have very much more on right to transfer, at least at this point. There's plenty of stuff later on. Okay. Okay. These takeaways at the end of each one, these are pretty critical. Like, they're very important to know. So that's what I'm mainly going to be focused on for the remainder of studying for property. It's just making sure that I stay on top of that stuff. Okay, so right to transfer, we have that taken care of so far. So right to exclude, trespass is the big one. Strict liability, any I can't spell. Any unprivileged entry is an actionable offense. This doesn't require intent to trespass, merely the intent to enter the land. Let me write to exclude is the format of this is going to be awful, but I'm the one who's using it, so it doesn't really matter too much. But the right to exclude is relative to current possessor of the land. Land. We kind of also get this rule from not here. It's not Steenberg either. Stevie Shack. There we go. So there's that. I suppose I should just copy and paste what we have from Steenberg up. You know what? I already have trespass memorized from torts last semester, so I'll just. How do you spell? Okay. All right. Thank you all for taking the time to be here again for this. I know that this isn't the most interesting thing in the world, but I figured that I should spend some time studying, and doing a live stream of it wasn't the worst idea in the world. I need an excuse to force myself to sit down and actually study, and also I've been really slacking on making content, so I figured that this was a good compromise. We'll do. You only have a little bit more to fill in. Okay. Right to use. Okay. This is nuisance. God, the formatting of this is so awful. I don't know why it keeps doing that, but it's not that bad to correct, so oh well. Hey. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name. Is that we do? If I mispronounced that, I apologize. But welcome. Right now I'm just copying over some of the information that I've already covered into my outline, so that way I have everything in one place. Right now I have outlines from other sections that I've taken this class, but I don't have my own, so I'm making my own. Oh my gosh. There we go. You know what? Here. Right now it's a ton of just formatting issues. Okay. And also I'll put in here under the right to use our spite fence doctrine. Okay, perfect. Joy is much easier to pronounce. But I'm glad that I didn't mess up too bad when I said it the first time. Spite fence doctrine cannot create spite fence or anything else with sole purpose of annoying neighbors, basically. And we get this from our sundowner case. Okay, this is everything that we had in terms of right to use. Okay, now we need to fill in right to destroy, which is the last thing that we went over. After I finish filling in this part, I'll jump over to con law for a little bit, because right now, because this will put us at a good stopping point for property law, because this will give us every single one of the rights in our bundle of rights, and then we can get into some of the duties that we have. I've been studying law for a year. This is actually my 1L year. I'm going into my spring semester finals, but I've been reading cases for a while before that, and a lot of my undergraduate work was related to philosophy and economics, and one of my favorite professors actually graduated from UPenn Law, so he would have me read cases a lot of the time and prepare for law school. So I've been studying at law school for a year, but I've been studying law for a little longer. This study session, though, I've only been at for about 2 hours. But for me, that's a long time because typically I don't study very much. But with finals coming up, I decided to buckle down and that this would be a good use of my time because I've been struggling to post content with classes and stuff. So figured I should do this. Here, I'll just write out the ones that I have from before. God, I can't type. Thank you. Joy, are you a student, a law school student, or are you interested in becoming one? Very nice. Are you, I'm guessing you're an undergraduate right now? Also, sorry that this looks very disorganized and kind of bad. I'm just jumping around right now, copying and pasting stuff over. We'll actually get into full on studying stuff here in a couple of minutes. I just have a little bit more to copy over. Let me jump down to the takeaways, see if I'm missing anything. I keep thinking that the audio for this is not going to be very good because I hear my laptop's fan just going crazy, but everybody said that it's fine so far, so I'm just taking all your words for it. Okay. Okay. Let's go here. What's the best way to title this section? Alright, acquisition. It's very nice that you're so driven. I'll make sure to remember your name. You're one of the first people to stop in on one of my live streams that's not a friend of mine that I actually know and actually sit there and comment, so I appreciate it. I'll be sure to remember your name. What type of law are you thinking of getting into? You know what? It's best to do it like this. Is this Johnson? Yes, okay. Oh my gosh, I suck at typing. Yeah, there's plenty of different types of law that you can get into. A lot of people go into law school not really knowing what they want to do with it yet. So just as long as you get there and you think about it, you'll eventually figure it out. I'm a rare case. I came to law school not wanting to be a lawyer, so I'm here for sports law, which is completely different. But a lot of people will come in just knowing that they want to make a difference and they don't know exactly what they want to do yet. You could go government route, you could work in criminal law, family law. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. So good on you just for knowing that you want to get into it. If you have any questions about any of the different types or fields of law, just let me know. The 1L year, you basically do an overview of every single big type of law that you'd cover. So I have a decent idea of what each one is, and I can give you some info and tips. Yeah, I can give you whatever info you want, and I can give you the rundown. Just let me finish typing up this last little bit. I'll run to the bathroom, and then you can type your questions in while I'm running to take care of that, and then I can chat and walk you through a bunch of them. That's part of what I wanted today to be, just answering questions. I don't want to just be sitting here typing up an outline the entire time. Okay, I will be right back. Anybody else that has any questions, feel free to just drop them in there. I'll take the next couple of minutes to answer questions, and then we'll switch over from studying for property to going over some stuff for constitutional law. Oh, before I go, Joy, I mentioned, I was saying to you, feel free to start typing up any questions you have. I'm going to run to the bathroom quick, and when I get back, we'll chat through all of them, and I'll answer any questions that you or anybody else in chat has. Alright, I am back. Here, let me open up a different Word doc, and I will start breaking down the different types of law and everything. And any of you that have any questions, you can just let me know. Joy, you have your pen and paper ready? Okay, there are a couple of big types of law that you see. There's corporate law, there's government, there's criminal law, there's property, there are torts, family law, patent / entertainment law. I'm trying to think of any other big ones, but these are the big ones that are coming to mind right now. Okay, so corporate law focuses mainly on business, maximizing profits, and making sure that you don't violate regulations. You work for companies. And you make sure that they are in the legal right with everything that they're doing. That's corporate law. In government, you make laws. That's basically it. You lobby for certain types of laws, and then you go and you make laws, and then you interpret them. This is all your legislature, all of your basically legislature, people that end up becoming judges, which is something different. So here, judiciary. Okay, these are judges. Their job is to interpret the laws. This is both the common law, which is decided cases and precedent, and then statutes, which are anything that's written by the government. Criminal law, there are two parties to it. There's prosecution and defense. There's private and public. Private defense, there's no such thing as private prosecution, at least not anymore. That used to be a thing in England back in the day, where you could privately prosecute someone for a criminal offense. But now there's only public prosecution, but there is public and private defense. Public defenders are what you think they are. They're people paid by the state or whatever government to go ahead and just defend people who are on trial. Private, it's the same thing. You just get paid by a company instead of paid by the government, and they make a lot more. Property, this boils down into they basically handle a lot of contract work. Leases and similar contracts, stuff like that. There are also subsets of property, like tribal law and water law. Torts is the most common thing that you probably think of outside of criminal law. These are anything that's not a criminal offense or a contract offense. These are laws that people violate, such as negligence, stuff like that. Corporate liability. Oh my gosh, I cannot type at all today. Corporate liability, stuff like that. Anytime that somebody gets into like car accident, injury attorneys, like anything like that will be handled by a tort lawyer. You'll handle any negligence claims, any personal injury claims. They're there to make sure that you're compensated for something wrong that happens to you. Criminal law and criminal lawyers are there to make sure that people are properly punished, or that the or that innocent people aren't unjustly punished. That's the big difference between the two. Family law, you will work a lot in stuff like estate planning. You can do divorce, stuff like that, wills, anything like that. Those are the big things that you focus on in family law. And then patent and entertainment law, you file paperwork, contracts. It's pretty straightforward stuff. If any of you have any questions, I'll leave this open in the background and we can jump over to any questions that people have about law school, being a lawyer in general, but these are just the basic breakdowns of the types of law that there are and the types of things that you'll be doing in that particular field. I know it's not super intriguing, but someone had a question about the rundown of basic types of law. I don't think that Joy's here anymore, but figured I'd type this out for any of you that are watching and have questions. So, yeah, with that out of the way, we have covered the first couple of weeks of property. I'll run you all through real quick again what we've covered. There are a couple of different theories of property and why we want to have private property, why we want to protect property rights. They're all listed here. I also mentioned them earlier in the live stream. If you have questions, you can type them in right now. Questions on anything, just let me know. But we'll just skim over that for now. We view property as a bundle of rights in law. Everybody thinks of property as a thing, like you own property, like whether that be chattels, like physical pieces of paper and stuff like that, or whether it be real property, which is what we call land and houses. There is still that physical thing, but in law we view it as just a bundle of different rights that you have regarding that thing. So you have the right to transfer anything that you own. You have the right to exclude other people from using it or entering your real property. You have the right to destroy whatever you own, and you have the right to use it and not be disturbed by someone else or their nuisance. So these all have their own little exceptions, like you can't destroy something if it would cause a nuisance to somebody else. You can't use your land in a way that pisses off your neighbors, and you can't do stuff that is done specifically to piss off your neighbors, regardless of how much you might like to. You can't build a fence to block out all their sunlight just to piss them off. But yeah, these are all of the different rights that we have as part of the bundle of rights that is property. I mentioned nuisance. Nuisance, the definition's right here. A private nuisance exists when the defendant's conduct results in an intentional, non-trespassory, unreasonable, and substantial interference with the plaintiff's use and enjoyment of their land. So that gets broken down into all of these different categories. I know that that's a lot of legalese right there, but it's straightforward if you break it down. Like, intentional means that you're doing it for the express purpose of causing harm. Non-trespassory means that you aren't actually going onto their land or you aren't building something on their land. Unreasonable is a balancing test relating to the benefit that you get from doing whatever activity it is related to the harm that your neighbor or whoever is suffering. And then substantial interference is just a threshold. Like, your neighbor can't complain or file for a nuisance for something that isn't substantial, that doesn't fully interfere on their rights. So if you're like talking in your apartment, they might be able to hear you, but it's not a substantial interference in their life. That's why you don't see people complaining about. That's why you don't see noise complaints just for normal conversations. If you could, then I'd be in trouble for recording YouTube videos in my apartment. And then use and enjoyment of their land. This is just something that we want to protect. Everybody has a right or an interest in using their land and getting the full enjoyment out of it. And if you interfere with somebody's use of their land and their enjoyment of it, then you might be causing them a nuisance. Last thing that we've covered to this point is how you acquire land. The uh, doctrines that we have are kind of strange. Like there's the first possessor doctrine. There's stuff related to labor, how much work you put into it. These relate back up to the theories of property that we have up at top. But the main one that we've covered so far is acquisition by discovery. This is very similar to land by first possession. If you discover land, you own it. An important reason to understand why this is that land ownership and property rights are prescribed by law. So wherever you live, whatever the laws are regarding property are how you're able to, are what the laws are. So I know that in some Middle Eastern countries, you are not allowed to own real property. It is just leased to you for a term of 99 years and 364 days. So just one day short of 100 years. You don't actually own that property, but you get all of the rights that would come with ownership, say here in the United States. It's all still owned by the government, though. The United States is based off of English's old law, so England's old law, and their property rights are acquired by discovery. And a weird quirk of this is that conquest counts as discovery. If you conquer somewhere, a new nation or whatever, under Old English law, that counts as discovery. So when England came over and discovered North America and conquered the area, they became the owners of America based on discovery. Therefore, the Native Americans that were living on the land couldn't transfer the land to someone else. They couldn't sell the land to anybody else because even though they were the ones in possession of it and they are the ones that actually discovered the land, under English law and therefore U.S. law, once we separated, once we gained our independence, the owner of the land is the one who discovers it. So in that case, it all became England's land, then America's after independence. So any transactions the natives tried to make with it were voided as they were illegal. And that's everything that we've covered so far with property. That was the first about month of my property class. I took a while to get used to jumping back and forth because I wasn't really sure how to study with this class. Some of the other classes, like here is an outline that I was going to use. But my professor, we don't have an outline in the outline bank that I have access to for him, and I couldn't find one anywhere. So I was doing one from a different professor. This doesn't mesh very well with what we actually covered in class, so I started just going through all of the PowerPoints and stuff, and that's how I got to doing what I have now, and I decided maybe like 20 minutes ago to start making my own outline, so that's what took me so long. I think for a little bit we might switch over to con law, and then we'll go back to property in a little bit. Let me just double check and make sure that I've covered enough of this. Yeah, okay. I covered a decent amount of that. We will pop on over to constitutional law for a little bit. Here, let me open up a separate Word doc. For con law, there are actually outlines from my professor's class from last spring, which is the last time that he taught it. So I may end up just using those exclusively, but for now I'm going to have this open just in case I want to use it. So and for any of you who were getting confused, con law is just short for constitutional law. I decided to start with these two classes because they're the most dense and ones that I'm least prepared for, even though my first exam is actually going to be criminal law on Tuesday. I'm going to spend the weekend focused on criminal law. But I want to get a solid foundation done for the other classes. My last class is professional responsibility, PR, which I'm not worried about at all. So that will just wait until the very end. Let's see. Yeah, this is from my professor's class, so I'm going to just go through what we have here and explain things and relearn them as much as I can going through this. For common law, our professor doesn't have very in-depth PowerPoints, so you know what? I don't need to have the textbook open for that. I was going to open it up, but I don't need you all seeing my email and stuff, and I don't want to. Actually, you know what? Here, I'll switch over to... Sorry, you have to stare at my face for a couple of minutes until I finish logging in. This will just take a second. This is part of the reason why I need to get a better actual stream set up. Because if I could just press a button or two and switch things over, that would be nice. And also if I had an actual camera set up as opposed to using my webcam. When I did my piano live stream, I had my phone streaming video as well, but upon rewatching it, I realized that a lot of it was a little out of sync, and also I wanted to have my phone open so that way I could have chat open, because otherwise I'd have to... Oh, I'm done logging back in, by the way, so there we go. Okay, so I wanted to have my chat open because otherwise I would have had chat just on screen, and I didn't want you guys to have to deal with that while we're doing stuff like studying. Imagine if there was just a chat box right here that would get distracting when trying to learn about constitutional law, which is what we are going to do. Since we are on the constitutional law, I'm going to take my property notebook, set it aside, and we will pull out my con law notebook. I took a lot of notes for con law this semester. I always forget which one it is. I think it's this one. Yep. Okay. So I took a lot of notes for con law this semester because I didn't do very much reading, so I needed to have a way to stay on point, and for me that was having this. Yeah, so hopefully these will work. Okay, let me see just how many notes I have. Yeah, these are my notes for common law from the semester. I know that doesn't seem like very much, but considering last semester I had, 3 pages for my contract law class, that is a lot for me. Okay, this class started the same way that property law did, where we talk about a lot of the theoretical underpinnings of stuff and the philosophical reasons behind it. Here, though, it's a lot about interpretation, as you can see by the first point up here, constitutional interpretation. There are a lot of ways that people try and interpret what the Constitution says and how it should be applied. The big example of this that you see in modern discourse today is how the Second Amendment should be interpreted. People will argue for originalism in that it should stick with exactly what's stated in the Constitution. And some people will argue against originalism and say that circumstances have changed and the law needs to change. We can't interpret it the same way anymore. So, a lot of people who are this can get very murky because some people will be originalists and say that Second Amendment should be very deeply entrenched and that everybody should and that there should be a right to bear arms regardless. But other people will say that originalism should only apply to like the weapons that were available at the time. So you can see that this is a very murky area. Constitutional law is the most up in the air, unsettled piece of law that you study during your first year of law school. There's not much that is decided about it. I think that a good place to start, let's cover interpretation and then we will jump over to looking at the actual Constitution so I can show you guys why there are some issues. So, like I was just explaining, interpretation. There are two main branches, originalism and non-originalism, or living constitution, as a lot of people refer to it as. Originalism, they prefer to stick with what's stated in the Constitution, and they say that the rationale behind it, reading the Constitution specifically, the way that it's written, is because we already have a way built into the Constitution to change it. We shouldn't be changing the way that we interpret it. We should change the Constitution by amendment if we want to enact any actual changes. So, since we do have the amendment power in there, a lot of people will go with originalism and say that we should use the amendment process whenever we want to change the Constitution. Non-originalists believe that the Constitution is flexible and that anything that's vague in it should be changed and applied to what's happening at the current time. So a lot of people who are living constitutionalists will believe that basically what I just said, it should be applied to the time. God, my brain is kind of fried right now. I didn't realize that I'd been going for almost 3 hours and just talking nonstop during it. So we will jump through this and then figure out what we're going to do. I may end up taking a little bit of a break. We might end up doing a little bit of something else. But yeah, anybody that's here and has questions for me about anything, just let me know. But for right now, I'm going to finish going through like the interpretation parts of the Constitution. And just so you know, the people who are interpreting the Constitution are the Supreme Court. Other federal courts will do some interpretation, but the Supreme Court are the ones that make the final interpretation of what the Constitution is meant to say, and it's important to understand the rationale behind it, because this can give us an insight into why they're making the decisions that they are. So, a lot of the first part of interpretation and one of the little branches in it is textualism. You look at what the actual text says, and you look at the intent of the people who wrote it at the time. Another is looking at intent. You look at the intent of whatever the writers had at the time. So it's hard to really know what the Constitution's designers and writers actually intended, and it could vary from writer to writer. So this one isn't super effective, and there aren't very many documents showing what people's intents actually was. Next big one for interpretation is precedent. This focuses on what the court has decided in the past, and what they want to stick to. We have this thing in law called the stare decisis, or it's basically just precedent. There are binding precedents which you can't really overturn. The only courts that really can change their mind about stuff are the Supreme Court. Anything lower than that needs to go based off of the rulings of their prior decisions, but this leads to some issues when times change. You don't want to be applying the same law the way that it was 100 years ago, so there are some issues with focusing on precedent. Another part of interpretation is tradition. You look at what was happening at the time that the Constitution was written, and this will give you some clues as to how it should be interpreted, but it can be pretty ambiguous because you don't know exact details of what the tradition was back then. I'm realizing that this is boring as all hell for all of you, so I think I'm probably going to switch back to property law as soon as we finish this up. And the last part of interpretation, at least in the beginning, is policy. A lot of times the Supreme Court justices will make arguments based on policy and how things should be moving forward, and that's just a way that we can interpret the Constitution. If it would create bad policy to do something one way, oftentimes the court will argue that that shouldn't be the case. Okay, with that, I know that this is boring for all of you, so I'm going to jump back to property law for a little bit. I'm not sure how much longer I'll keep streaming. We're coming up on 3 hours, and I know that people have stuff going on. Here, we'll go through another PowerPoint or two for property law, and then we will see how things are going. Okay. Adverse possession. This one is actually really fun and kind of interesting. Adverse possession allows you to take someone else's property that they own just by using it. This can lead to some really interesting outcomes. There are a couple of factors that go into adverse possession, like there are certain, here they are, to obtain title through adverse possession. So in order to actually get legal title to someone else's property, you need to show that what you were doing with the property was actual possession, exclusive, open and notorious, adverse and hostile, and continuous for whatever the duration the statute says. So here, let's break down each of those elements in order. And again, this is for adverse possession. So when someone else has land and you are using it under a strict set of circumstances, you can legally take their land away from them. So say your neighbor's property line is kind of ambiguous, and they don't go that far deep back into the woods or whatever. If you use those woods for your own gain, like say you build a little shed on your neighbor's property and you use that land for hunting or whatever, you can make a claim for adverse possession and try and take the land for yourself. The elements that go into it are actual possession, exclusive possession, open and notorious possession, adverse and hostile possession, and then continuous possession. So these are all just ways that you need to be treating the land in order to possess it, to gain title through adverse possession. So, actual possession relates to you must actually physically use the land in the same way that a reasonable owner would. So, walking across someone's property isn't actual possession. That would relate more to something like trespass. But if you build a structure on someone else's property, that could be actual possession. You're using it in a manner that a reasonable owner would. So if you build a shed, plant a garden, store a bunch of your stuff there, that can be actual possession. Exclusive possession is you are the only person using that land. So it can't be shared with the actual owner or the public in general. So say that the owner is very lax and he doesn't care who comes onto their land, and like say they have a garden and anybody can go and plant anything and take anything from it. If it's open to the entire public, you can't exclusively possess it. Or if it's like on the border of your land and their land, and you go hunting there fairly regularly, but the neighbor also goes hunting there. If the original owner is actually using it, then you don't have exclusive possession. Open and notorious is exactly like it sounds. You need to make it visible. Like it should be reasonably visible. Like the owner should know or reasonably know if they made any inspection that you're using the land. So if you're secretly sneaking onto someone's property and building something and they don't know that's going on, that doesn't count. It needs to be open. They need to be able to tell, like say they walk back there and they see it going on. Like anything that a reasonable owner should know about would count as open and notorious. Also, sorry if I'm rushing through a bunch of these. I did a memo on adverse possession last semester, so I'm fairly familiar with it. It needs to be adverse and hostile. This differs from state to state. There's the objective test, which is used in most states, where you don't care what the adverse possessor's state of mind is. If they occupy the land, then the test for hostility is met. So it's similar to trespass. You just need to intend to occupy the land. You don't need to intend to adversely possess it. You just need to intend to possess it. So even if you don't know that you're adversely possessing it, you can meet this under the majority view. On the minority view, you need to have a state of mind where you're trying to adversely possess it. That needs to be part of your mental state under the minority view. Continuous possession just means that you need to be doing it continuously. There's this little provision as a reasonable owner's possession would be. So say the land is meant to be used for like something very infrequently, like I said, hunting. You can only hunt certain parts of the year. You don't need to be on the land continuously even during non-hunting season, so long as you're using it as a reasonable owner would, i.e. going on there to hunt during hunting season. That's met. And then the statutory range, this is just how long you need to be meeting these requirements for in order to file for adverse possession. Some states have as low as 5 years. The one that I'm familiar with the most is 10 years, and some states have as high as 40 years. Here in Arizona, we have 10 years. So we have a couple of reasons why we require all these why we're so strict about requiring adverse possession. The least of which is that we don't want people just taking other people's property willy-nilly. So you want to make sure that the person claiming adverse possession actually has a good claim to take the land and that they aren't just going around taking it for no reason. It helps correct title defects because if there are mistakes in how the land is zoned or the titles for it, then adverse possession allows the person who's actually using it to end up getting it. So this is like when the deed shows a poor boundary line for your property that neither you or your neighbor are aware of until later on. Like if say your neighbor's property actually crosses over like into your on the inside of your fence, you it's fairly obvious that you're using the area on your side of your fence, and this can be a good way to correct that. And there are just a couple of other reasons why we allow adverse possession. They relate to our differing reasons for why we have property in the first place and how we protect it. But yeah, the cases for this are all very confusing and in detail intense, so I'm not going to go super deep into them. There are some issues that arise out of these cases, like can you add up the period for like how long certain people are living, for how long people are like adversely possessing. So sometimes you can add stuff on if they're members of the same family and stuff like that, but sometimes you can't add up the durations. So yeah, and this is kind of the rule that we get out of the first case relating to adverse possession. You can't claim adverse possession unless you or someone in your direct like family line was the one actually possessing it. Say you have a friend that gives you that says, "Oh, this land is yours now." They were the ones adversely possessing it. That doesn't count. You can't add their time onto yours. Yeah, my bad about. At this point, my brain is starting to fry because I haven't taken a real break in the past 3 hours, so I'm probably going to cut it here in just a little bit. Yeah, I think that the plan for now is going to be I'll copy over some of the elements for adverse possession into my outline, and then we will reevaluate what we're going to do from there. I'm not sure if I'll end stream or if I'll take a break and come back. Really just depends on what you guys want. So while I'm copying this stuff over, anybody have any questions on anything that we've done today at all? Or about law school in general? My experience at law school, what ASU is like? Or just anything else. I don't mind answering any questions that y'all have. Also, my bad about how disjointed this stream has been. I woke up, like, I had the idea to do it yesterday, and I woke up today and decided to actually stream it, which I probably should have put more thought and effort into. But yeah, I know that this was very disjointed and haphazard, but that's the way that most things are that I do. Okay. Those are all of the elements of adverse possession that we have in here now. Let me look back through here, see what other rules I want to take. Okay. And you know, do I want to copy paste that or do I want to rephrase that? Oftentimes it's best if you can to rephrase legal rules in your own words instead of just copying and pasting. For elements and stuff, it's okay to copy and paste them, like the factors that go into adverse possession that I just copy and pasted. That's okay. But when it's stuff like this, oftentimes it's better to try rephrasing it. No action for the recovery of any lands or for the recovery of the possession thereof shall be commenced, unless it appears that the plaintiff, his ancestor, blah blah blah, under whom he claims was seized or possessed at the premises in question. Okay. So this will give us how do you spell Gerwood again? Gerwet, okay. Okay. What else do I want to take from this PowerPoint? Okay, this is the case where we get the majority versus minority rule. For adverse possession and when it needs to be hostile. Oh, Joy, are you back? I just saw your new message. If you're here, let me know. Okay. This is actually a good cutoff point. I'll jump over to the different types of law. I typed this out earlier when you stepped away, but we'll cover this. And if you have any questions, just type them in chat. Let me know. We'll cover this, and then I'll probably stop stream after that because I'm starting to like hit that wall. So these are the big types of law that we have in general. The first one and the most lucrative is corporate law. This is business oriented. You will be working for companies trying to maximize profits, and your job mainly revolves around doing contract work and mergers and acquisition work, and also making sure that the company that you're working with or working for doesn't violate the law in any way, or that any of your agreements that they're going through don't violate the law. So this is the type of law that you see if you've ever watched Suits. That's the dramatization of this type of law. Next up is government. This is lawmaking. It's your local government, your state legislatures, and and the federal legislature. This is all about making laws, lobbying for certain positions, trying to get laws passed, and then figuring out how they should be enforced. Government is in charge of writing the laws. Related to government is the judiciary. This is judges and people that work in courts. Your job is to interpret the laws written by legislatures. And that's all that you do. You just interpret the law, apply it to the specific case before you, and decide who has what rights. Most people don't go directly to the judiciary route. You need to be a lawyer for a little while before you end up going this route, but it's still pretty interesting. A lot of people still go that way. A big one that a lot of people go into is criminal law. There are two sides. There's prosecution and defense. You see this all the time on TV. The prosecution basically tries to make sure that the public is protected from criminals and that criminals are punished. And the defense tries to limit that punishment to what they believe is reasonable, and make sure that individuals who aren't guilty aren't punished. So they'll advocate for their side, and the judge will make the final decision. Well, judge and jury. But real quick, for criminal law, there's public defenders and private defenders. Public defenders are appointed by the government to make a defense claim for individuals who can't afford private defense counsel, and private defense are private individuals who work for profit, like they're paid by their client. So, yeah. Another type of law that you see a lot of people work in is property law. You see this with people reading over leases, doing contract work. There are a couple of different subsets, like tribal law and water law. This is just determining who has what right to what land, when it's been infringed upon. I mean, right now I've been studying property law, so that's all that we've been covering to this point, and it's answering who has what right to this property and whether or not that right has infringed on someone else's right, blah, blah, blah. The other main type of law that is kind of the counterpoint to criminal law is tort law. This is whenever you hear somebody say, oh, I slipped and fell, or I sued this company and I got money, like that's tort law. Torts are any civil wrongs. There's a difference between civil and criminal. Criminal, the punishment is that you broke a criminal law and your punishment is prison, time in confinement, blah blah blah, anything along those lines. Civil is you broke a law, but it wasn't criminal. So for violating that law, your punishment is going to be fines. You're going to have some like sanctions imposed on you, and the people that litigate those are uh, injury attorneys, people that work in negligence, and then people that work in corporate liability. So you'll see a lot of class action cases and people that work defending corporations. So that's torts, and that's the big one that is the counterpoint to criminal law. So torts are anything that's not a criminal law proceeding or a contract work, and contracts are like spread out through all these other categories. Uh, Family law is a nice little subset of the law family. You They work a lot in estate planning and making sure that wills and stuff are handled properly. They do stuff like divorce, separation, stuff like that. Anything where you're working with families relating to separation, how money should be spread out, stuff like that. This is typically seen with older people working on wills for their families. And then the last major one is patent and entertainment law. Your job is really just to file paperwork, make contracts. You're making sure that people get the correct patents, that nothing's infringed upon. This is a lot to do with copyrights and patents, stuff like that. And these are the main types of law that come to mind. There are a ton of little subsets that go into each and every one of these. You Corporate lawyers could work with businesses, or they could even go into the subset of patent and entertainment work, stuff like that. So there are plenty of other options, but these are the big branches that you see people tend to fall into. So any questions relating to that? I know I kind of breezed through it, but any questions on the types of law? Any of these particularly pique your interest? Yeah, family law attracts a lot of people. You can do a lot with it. You can Most people tend to view it as only like divorce proceedings, but a lot of people do wills and estates, and that's a big one. A lot of people really like that. That's a tough class, though. It's called decedent estates, and it's a upper level law class that's pretty tough for a lot of people. But if you get into it and you understand the rules behind it, you can make a solid living doing that and helping people out. Any other questions relating to this? Or to anything that I've covered today? Any questions from anybody about anything? And for anybody that might be watching this later, I'm going to post this stream straight to my YouTube channel. But anybody that's watching later, feel free to comment, and I'll get to your questions as soon as I can. Alright, it doesn't look like we have any more questions really coming in. So with that, I'm going to say thank you all for stopping into the stream. I appreciate you all being here, and I will see you all next time. See ya. Actually, you know what? Let me go full cam for the farewell. Alright. Thanks again for stopping in for the stream. I really appreciate you all being here. I know that this was kind of boring. I was just sitting here studying the entire time, and there wasn't a ton of chat going on, but hopefully you found it interesting. Hopefully you learned something. This was very beneficial to me because it forced me to actually sit down and study. So I hope that you learned something, or that you just enjoyed spending time here. I may or may not do another study with me stream in the future. I'm not sure how well law school studying translates to this, but we'll see. Thank you all so much again for watching. And Joy, thank you. I appreciate you saying that it's not boring. Thank you all so much for watching. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll see if I do another one of these. But